Today we will learn and reflect on the last commandment, do not envy. And we look to the wisdom of Winnie-the-Pooh to teach us valuable lessons and how easy it is to fall into the trap of envy. And also a delightful story from the Gnostic Acts of Thomas, or Thomas Didymus, the apostle also known as the twin. Now you might ask, why are we discussing Winnie-the-Pooh, Piglet, and Eeyore, and also the Gnostic Acts of Thomas in the same video? Are we implying that both of these works have equal standing for consideration as rising to the standards of canonicity? Well, actually, that's exactly what we're implying. There are many scurrilous books and videos circulating that somehow the early church was hiding something, or denigrating somebody, or suppressing some people when they decided that the Gnostic works were heretical and should be suppressed. And the truth is, the Gnostic works are heretical and should not be regarded as scripture. But on occasion there are moral lessons to be gleaned from these works, as long as we discard that chaff, the heresies. After all, we do much the same with the Stoic philosophers. We will also learn something about Gnosticism. Most Gnostic systems have heretical views on intimacy. They're either overly ascetic, saying that physical intimacy is evil because it's associated with the mortal world, or they're sexually libertine, saying that since this world is evil and holds no power over us holy ones, we can do anything we like, since evil can't harm us. Now at the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in our PowerPoint script posted to SlideShare. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. Now, the true measure of a classic children's story is that it can teach moral lessons to both children and adults, and that adults can enjoy reading them even if they have no children. And that's especially true for Winnie-the-Pooh, which includes the story of Eeyore's birthday party, which teaches us valuable lessons on the danger of the sin of envy, and how envy can creep into our souls without being noticed. Benjamin Hoff, who wrote the Tao of Pooh, has excerpts from Winnie-the-Pooh on Eeyore's birthday party. So rather than duplicating his work, I'll just simply quote from these pages of his delightful book. And our friend Hoff narrates. Let's take another example of how things work out. Eeyore's birthday party. Pooh discovered, after Eeyore told him, after Pooh found Eeyore so sad even for Eeyore, and he asked him why he was so sad. And Eeyore moaned and said it was his birthday, and waved about and said, "Look at all my birthday presents." And Pooh, clueless, said he didn't see anything at all. At which time he told Pooh, "Today is Eeyore's birthday." Christopher Robin remembers. So Pooh decided to give him something. He went home to get a jar of honey to use as a birthday present, and talked things over with Piglet, who decided to give Eeyore a balloon that he'd saved from a party of his own. But after a while, Pooh began to get hungry. So Pooh sat down and took the top off his jar of honey. "Lucky I brought this with me," he thought. Many a bear going out on a warm day like this would have never have thought of bringing a little something with him, and so he began to eat. "Let me see," he thought as he took his last lick of the inside of the jar. "Where was I going? Ah yes, Eeyore." Pooh got up slowly, and suddenly he remembered. He had eaten Eeyore's birthday present. Well, most of it anyway. Fortunately, he still had the jar, and that would make a very nice birthday jar. After all, it was a nice jar, even with nothing in it. Now Christopher Robin remembers that Piglet had gone back to his own house to get Eeyore's balloon. He held it very tightly against himself so that it shouldn't blow away, and he ran as fast as he could so as to get to Eeyore before Pooh did. For he thought that he would like to be the first one to give a present, just as if he had thought of it without being told by anybody. Now this is a subtle form of envy, wanting to look better than your neighbor. And this is envy because you're tempted to damage the reputation of your neighbor to enhance your own reputation. But how can Piglet be envious? We will allow Christopher Robin to continue. And running along, thinking how pleased Eeyore would be, Piglet didn't look where he was going, and suddenly he put his foot in a rabbit hole and fell down flat on his face. Bang went the balloon. Bang went the birthday present. Now we must ask ourselves, did bad karma punish Piglet as he was running to the house of Eeyore? Was Piglet guilty of both the Judeo-Christian sin of envy, when he schemed to look better than his best friend Pooh, and also the Greek sin of hubris, the sense of arrogance that so easily sneaks up on all of us? And we first discussed this concept of hubris in our discussion of the Iliad by Homer, where Achilles is guilty of hubris in the Trojan Wars, where he kills the Trojan Hector in battle in retaliation for his killing of Patroclus, friend of Achilles. And Achilles then drags the body of Patroclus behind his chariot, circling the fortified city of Troy for days and days, angering the gods for his disrespect for the dead and for the feelings of the family of the dead Hector. So, you might ask, am I so fond of Homer and the Iliad that I'm going to invite them to Eeyore's birthday party? Well, maybe. Although hubris is not emphasized as much in the Decalogue as it is in the epics of the ancient warrior cultures, you can see the punishment of hubris as a secondary theme in many Old Testament stories. And the book we're quoting from, The Tao of Pooh, is a delightful little book on how you can see the principle of Taoism in these delightful children's stories. And Dr. Google told us about another book that discusses how unassuming Winnie-the-Pooh can teach us Christian moral lessons, and that's The Gospel According to Winnie-the-Pooh, which we ordered, and if it's interesting, we'll cut a video reviewing this book. Benjamin Hoff is speaking, or maybe Christopher Robin is remembering. "Balloon," said Eeyore to Piglet. "Did you say balloon? One of those big colored things you blow up? Oh, gaiety, song and dance, and here we are, and there we are." "Oh yes, but I'm very sorry, Eeyore, but when I was running along to bring it to you, I fell down." "Dear, dear, how unlucky. You ran too fast, I expect. You didn't hurt yourself, little Piglet." "No, but Eeyore, I burst your balloon." And there was a very long silence, a long Eeyore type of silent sadness. The dialogue seems so free and easy, but the author has carefully crafted the dialogue to teach children who read it, and us, how to teach children, and all who read it how to care for each other and how to be concerned for each other. Now Eeyore's pretty much ignored in his thistle patch in the forest, but Piglet says he trips on a run. But what concerns Eeyore? Are you hurt? Now, really, can you imagine a child asking that? And so the characters in the 100-Acre Wood are really ideal children. And the 40 Acres Wood of Pooh Bear is truly a safe place for children, a place totally without guile, as you can see from the sign outside Piglet's house. Trespassers will. And adults quickly add, "Be shot." But Piglet imagines that the sign states that his grandfather, Trespassers William, lived in this house before him. Now to enter the kingdom of heaven, we must be without guile, like Pooh. And we must be like children, as Jesus exhorts us. "Let the little children come to me, and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs." And the remarkable apostolic writing that most explicitly discusses how we should be without guile is the Shepherd of Hermas. And the Shepherd of Hermas teaches us, "Be simple and guileless, be like children who are ignorant of the wickedness that ruins the life of man." And the Shepherd of Hermas instructs us how to cultivate the purity in our hearts by avoiding covetousness, as he continues. "Speak evil of no one, and do not revel in anyone who speaks evil of another. You sin when you listen to slander, and when you believe the slander, you become a slanderer. Slander is evil and an unsteady demon, never peaceful, always stirring up discord. And often, covetousness and slander go hand in hand." Now the 40-Acre Wood of Pooh Bear is a safe oasis for our children, an oasis each of us should seek to construct for our own children, and as much as possible in a sinful world, a place we should construct for ourselves. The 40-Acre Wood is truly a place without guile, where there is never any thought of anyone calling anybody else names. A place without slanders, a place where envy is but a fleeting thing beaten back by the lack of guile and malevolence. And so we will continue with our unbirthday party. "My balloon?" said Eeyore at long last. Piglet nodded. "My birthday balloon?" "Yes, Eeyore," said Piglet, sniffling a little bit. "Here it is, with many happy returns of the day," and Piglet gave Eeyore the small piece of damp rag. "This is it," said Eeyore, a little surprised. Piglet nodded. "My present?" and Piglet nodded again. Just then Pooh arrived. Pooh always saves the day. "I brought you a little present," said Pooh excitedly. "It's a useful pot. This useful pot is for putting things in." And then Eeyore discovered, since the balloon was no longer as big as Piglet, it could be easily put away in a useful pot and taken out whenever it was needed, which certainly couldn't be done with a typical unmanageable balloon. "I'm very glad," said Pooh happily, "that I thought of giving you a useful pot to put things in." "And I'm very glad," said Piglet happily, "that I thought of giving you something to put in a useful pot. But Eeyore wasn't listening. He was taking the balloon out and putting it back in again, as happy as could be. How content Eeyore was with his pot and his balloon in this story. Perhaps the story is not about Eeyore and his birthday and his useful pot and his balloon to put in the useful pot, but that Eeyore realizes that the Pooh and Piglet aren't perfect, since they did almost forget his birthday. In the end, they were his friends, genuine friends who cared about him. And realizing this, Eeyore is not at all tempted to be envious of those who receive better birthday presents than useful pots and balloons to put in useful pots. Then Benjamin Hoff has some esoteric Taoist kind of lessons that he drew from this subdued unbirthday party. But I think the essence of what he was saying can be summed up from the verses of my favorite Doris Day song, Que sera, sera. When I was just a little girl, I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera, what will be, will be. Now Doris Day is a much better singer than I, so I'll let her sing the full 6 stanzas of this beautiful song. And the reality for some of us, and for all of us some of the time, is that when our birthdays are forgotten, sometimes there is a Pooh or Piglet who steps up to remember our birthday party. When kids are younger, how often are their parents too busy to take them to the park? When the kids are older with kids of their own, how often are they too busy to visit the grandparents? Sometimes even complaining about how the grandparents really don't spend time with their kids. How quickly we can fall into the gateway sin of envy when we feel life is not fair, when our loved ones really don't find time to show their love to us. How many retirees want to say to their grown kids, who have families and lives of their own, kids, you have my permission to just skip my funeral. I promise I won't complain. And instead bring the family down to visit me on my birthday or in the summer, or let's do a cruise together. After all, flights are cheaper if you book them months in advance, rather than booking them on the spur of the moment, just before I'm lowered 6 feet under. And that's, by the way, is the theme of the recent 2018 Disney movie, Christopher Robin. But the truth is, sometimes there is no Pooh or Piglet to comfort us. Sometimes we face injustice and cruelty, but regardless, we are the guardians of our thoughts and emotions. We are responsible for our happiness, nobody else. Now Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher, advises us in his meditations to begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, the unsocial. All people you would never meet in the 40 Acres Wood, by the way. All these things happen to them because they are ignorant of what is good and evil. I can neither be injured by any of these, for no one can fix for me what is ugly, nor can I be angry with my kinsman, nor hate him. Which brings us to the second part of our lecture, which is all about saving up treasures in heaven rather than on earth. And the story in the Gnostic Acts of Thomas references the parable of the rich man in Luke, who the Lord bids not to store his treasures in barns on earth, but rather to gather up treasure in heaven. And this is such a beautiful verse, I'm going to read it in its entirety. The land of a rich man brought forth plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. There I will store all my grain and all my goods. Then I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. And we have the exhortation on the Sermon on the Mount. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Give alms to the poor, and being generous to your neighbor is an antidote to prevent the evil vine of envy from growing around and choking your heart. And this link is made in the Catholic Catechism, which references the apostolic work cited, the Shepherd of Hermas. This generosity to our neighbor also is an antidote to the sins of slander, theft, and hatred for your neighbor, as well as being an antidote to envy. And other church fathers reaffirm this teaching, including St. Gregory of Nyssa. Why was the Acts of Thomas denounced in antiquity as a heretical Gnostic work? Well, Thomas the Apostle was known as Thomas Didymus in Greek, and Didymus is a nickname meaning the twin. The scriptures, tradition, and history are all silent as to exactly why Thomas was called the twin. Maybe that was just part of his name. We do not know. But the Acts of Thomas imagines that Thomas was the twin brother of Jesus, which contradicts all the theological formulations agreed upon in the 7 ecumenical councils of the ancient world. After all, how can twins be part of the Trinity? Would Jesus' twin brother then share in his divinity? Perhaps this would support the heretical view that both Thomas and Jesus were both born mortal, and that Jesus' divinity descended upon him after he was born, perhaps when he was baptized by John in the Jordan. Anyway, in our video, we will mostly use Manichae or pagan images. We do not want to support the idea that Gnosticism is merely a different form of Christianity. Manichaeism is best known and is the most successful of the Gnostic systems. St. Augustine fell under its spell in his youth, and it also spread to China. The Acts of Thomas also has a heretical view of marital intimacy. Thomas travels to India at the time the king is throwing a festival to celebrate the marriage of his only daughter. And kings are always eager for their daughters to marry and have children to carry on the royal bloodline. But our Gnostic Jesus miraculously appears in the bridal chamber of our royal couple, and he proceeds to instruct them, no children allowed. This Gnostic Jesus says what the real Jesus would never say. If you abandon this filthy intercourse, you become holy temples, pure and free from afflictions and pains both manifest and hidden, and you will not be burdened about cares for life and for children, the end of which is destruction. After all, your children might turn into robbers, or demons may possess them, or you might turn into robbers trying to earn a living to feed your children. And Dad, the king, is really upset when he learns that his daughter and son-in-law have decided to follow the heretical advice of this Gnostic Jesus, when his daughter proudly announces she will live the life of a nun, although she's married. I will have no intercourse with a short-lived husband, the end of which is remorse and bitterness of soul, because I am yoked with a true man, the heretical Gnostic Jesus, who is not Jesus at all, who is not the Jesus who turned water into wine at the wedding of Cana. And St. Paul explicitly rejects the idea that married men or women should live their married lives as virgins. Withholding intimacy can be most uncaring. Now that we've established that our Gnostic Jesus is not the real Jesus, but rather a storybook Jesus, we learn in the 1st chapter of Acts that our Gnostic Jesus tells his brother Thomas, "Fear not, Thomas, go to India and preach the word there, for my grace is with you." But Thomas would not obey and said, "Send me where you will, but somewhere else, for I am not going to the Indians." So what does our Gnostic Jesus do? He sells his twin brother Thomas into slavery to a merchant serving the king of India, King Gandaphrus, since the merchant and king could use a slave who knows carpentry, and the merchant set sails to India, with Thomas as his slave, which is not a very nice thing to do. You did not want to be sold into slavery in the ancient world. If you were very unlucky, that would mean a very miserable life for you. Now we come to the main story where King Gandaphrus contracts with Thomas to build him an earthly palace, but instead Thomas builds his king a palace in heaven. Now we will admit right off the bat, this is likely a situation where lying is not permitted. Partially because we do not want to justify a Gnostic lie, but because the lie does not directly save lives, as did the lies told to save the Jews of Schindler's List. Although Thomas is a carpenter, the king has doubts about whether he really knows something about building palaces, for he proposes to build his palace in the winter rather than the summer. And Thomas makes a big show about measuring the land on which the palace will be built, and planning where the doors and the windows and the bakehouse and the aqueducts will be built. So the king leaves him lots of money and departs, which is a clue right away that this is just a fairy tale. So how does Thomas go about building this palace, not on earth but in heaven? And the Acts of Thomas tells a story, and it is a charming story, with a moral lesson. Thomas took all the money and dispensed it, going about the towns and villages round about, distributing it and bestowing alms on the poor and afflicted, giving them relief, saying, "The king knows that he will receive a royal recompense, but the poor must for the present be refreshed." The king then sends an inquiry to Thomas on how the construction of his earthly palace is progressing, and Thomas does not miss a beat. He assures the king that all he needs to do now is build the roof for the palace, and more money is needed, which the poor need, because the poor always need more money, and more money they will get as soon as the king sends it. And the king is curious about his newly constructed palace, so he asks his friends, and they answer his inquiries. Neither has Thomas built a palace, nor has he done anything else of what he has promised to do, but he goes about the towns and villages, giving to the poor, teaching a new God, healing the sick, driving out demons, and we think he's a magician. Thomas continually prays and fasts, eating only bread with salt, wearing one garment in both fine weather or foul winter, and takes nothing for anyone, and that what he has he gives to others. Now in America, Thomas would likely be thrown in jail for fraud, But in ancient India, the king smote his face with his hand, shaking his head for a very long time. How does this delightful story resolve itself? The king's brother Gad dies, and in the Acts of Thomas, the angels took the soul of Gad into heaven, showing him the dwellings there, asking him, "In what kind of place would you like to live?" And of course, Gad sees the wonderful palace Thomas has been building in heaven for his brother, the king. But the angels say he cannot live there, so he asks the angels if he could visit the earth and buy the palace from his brother. And the story in the Acts of Thomas says that the angels agree to this. The angels let Gad's soul go, and on earth, while they were putting grave clothes on his corpse, his soul enters his corpse. And he sits up and says to those around him, "Call to my brother that I may ask him one request." The king listens to his brother's request. His brother, who is dead, but is now alive again. And after he recovers from the shock of seeing his brother resurrected, he asks his brother, "Why should I give you my castle in heaven? Ask Thomas to build for you a palace in heaven, and if he built one palace, he can build two." Now that he knows he truly has a palace in heaven, like Thomas told him, he releases Thomas from prison. And he requests that Thomas pray for him. And then there are Gnostic visions. But the Acts of Thomas never answers the most basic question. Why can't the king just share his castle in heaven with his brother? And this is not an idle question, because C.S. Lewis in his book, The Great Divorce, tells us one important distinction between heaven and hell. In heaven, everyone wants to be close to each other and be friends. But in hell, everyone wants to live by themselves, as far away from their neighbors as possible, because nobody likes their neighbors in hell. And the Talmud has a similar story of the first century convert to Judaism, the king of Adiabene, who during the famine gave away all his wealth to the poor. When his relatives criticized him for squandering his riches, he replied, "My ancestors stored up treasures for below, but I have stored up treasures for above. They stored their treasures in a place where power can prevail, but I in a place where force is powerless. They stored up treasures of money, but I of souls. They stored up treasures for others, but I for my own eternal good. They stored up treasures in this world, but I stored up treasures for the world to come." And this story was from our video on the teachings of the medieval rabbis on Do Not Envy. Now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. And now Winnie-the-Pooh has recently gone out of copyright. You could tell this is a very worn copy, which means that the illustrations of the original book are now in the public domain, which is lucky for us. Now, do not make the mistake of assuming that the Disney Winnie-the-Pooh is the same as the Pooh that Milne wrote about. The original Winnie-the-Pooh is more of a contemplative philosopher, or at least a hummer of tunes. The only Disney character that is similar in temperament to the original is Tigger, and perhaps Kanga and Roo. Even the original Eeyore is more erudite than the cartoon Disney version. And the exception is the recent 2018 Disney movie Christopher Robin, and his Pooh is a mix of the Disney and Milne Pooh Bears. And we found the Acts of Thomas as one of the books in the Other Bible compilation. Several complete manuscripts of the Gnostic Acts of Thomas have been preserved. The Greek versions are the earlier versions. Some of the heretical verses have been smoothed over in the Syrian manuscripts. This work should not be confused with the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which contains mostly sayings of Jesus, although they have similarities. The original manuscripts date back to the 3rd century, long after the Apostolic era, and are clearly not orthodox in their teachings. And you can see the Other Bible has a lot of interesting collections. The Jewish pseudepigrapha, the Christian apocrypha, Gnostic scriptures, which is an oxymoron, there's no such thing, which includes many Manichaean works, selections from the Kabbalah and the Zohar, if you're interested in that, and some interesting selections from the Dead Sea Scrolls, including some of the more famous Dead Sea Scrolls. And it includes a sampling from Pseudo-Dionysius and Plotinus, so it's a great introduction for many topics. And we find fascinating the infancy Gospels of Pseudo-Matthew, which is the source for much of the iconography and art depicting the nativity of Jesus before the late Middle Ages, where Jesus was born in a cave with help from a midwife. Also the infancy Gospel of James, and the very curious and heretical infancy Gospel of Thomas, whose Gnostic Jesus both kills and resurrects his playmates. And we may cut one or more of these videos on the non-canonical infancy Gospels as videos for Christmas of 2022. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.